It's pickle time, Ryan.
It's my favorite time, Colin.
Pickles.
All right.
I love pickles. So, pickle is a business problem, and we've got this really interesting business problem today of somebody has written into us, whose name shall be remain nameless. Whose name should we remain nameless? That's an unusual name to have, isn't it? Remain nameless. What's your name?
Go,
It's
Colin,
remain nameless.
If you're going to make fun of yourself, then I will certainly pile on. Absolutely. I actually named my second child Nameless, so it's not as unusual as you think it is.
Yeah, was that a surname or was it a middle name?
Yeah, that was the first name. Nameless Hamilton. He's very popular.
Yeah. Anyway, the podcast is going well so far. So let's carry on. So anyway, they've written in and basically said that they've done their research, that they've launched a new product, but the product isn't selling as the research predicted.
Yeah.
And therefore, what's the problem?
Yeah.
Which is, I guess, a classic one, isn't it? You do the research, you think you got a great product, and then it doesn't sell to the extent that you think it should. Or
what could be more frustrating? Customers are indicating in your research that this thing should be selling very well, and then you actually go to all the time and trouble of putting it together, and it turns out it doesn't actually sell. So this is a good pickle to attack.
It is. It is.
Yeah, I mean, I think I can think in the kind of two broad strokes here. It's possible that you're doing the wrong kind of research, and so you're getting back answers that are kind of correct in some way, but are irrelevant. Yeah. Or it could be that you're doing the research fine, and your customers genuinely don't know kind of what they want until they see it. I don't know. Are there other kind of broad strokes ways you can think of this going wrong before we dig into some specifics?
Yeah, I think for me, it goes back to, as when I read this, it goes back to what I've said many, many times, which is there's a difference between what customers say and what customers do.
Yeah.
So, and again, people will have heard me say my famous example of, Disney know that when they ask their customers what they want to eat at a theme park, Disney know that people say they want to have an option of a salad. But Disney also know that people don't eat salads at theme parks. They eat hot dogs and hamburgers.
So you've used that example a lot, Colin, and it's a good one. But let's break that down. Let's talk about why people do that and why that's a problem. Right. So my interpretation of that, I'd be interested to hear your take. I assume that this might be kind of a mindset problem where if you're asking me in any kind of research setting, I may be in a different frame of mind than I would be when I was in that consumption setting. So if I'm thinking about myself as a person, well, I've got these health goals, and so ask me what kind of things I'd want. And I like a salad. I eat those, not infrequently. But then when I'm not in that research setting, when I'm actually at the park, and now I'm in a completely different frame of mind. Now I'm interested in just having fun, and this is vacation. And so to a certain extent, I'm two different people when I'm consuming and when I'm answering the research question.
Yeah, I was having a chat with a mate of mine last night. We went for dinner with them, and he was talking about the way that we human beings have this persona of ourselves, what we think that we look to the outside world. Yeah. And then there's the reality, of what we are really like. So, so for me, it's absolutely that, which is, yes, I must eat. I'm about healthy food. Right. I'm about healthy living. I'm on a diet, and I want to eat the right things. But in the moment, and that's the key phrase for me, in the moment, I get wrapped up in the being at Disney and everything else, and decide to buy the salad.
So, I mean, to a certain extent, this is a limitation of all research, or at least of all research that's not happening through observation and in the moment, right?
Yes.
And, I assume you're in the same boat. Like, I'm not down on research. I think research is wonderful. I think you can provide all kinds of wonderful things, great insights. But this is a huge caveat. Like, this is something that we should always be cautious of when we are looking to apply research, is that to a greater or lesser extent, the people that we are asking their opinions of are going to be different from the people who are making those decisions later, even if it's the same people.
Yeah, and this is just for the listener, this is where we're going to get down to in this podcast, which is looking at the true motivation of that. But let's carry on. Let's carry on this and move down to that in a minute. So yeah, I think the other interesting thing isn't it is just the way the research is done. So, and I don't know in the case of Disney, but did they have a pull down menu that gave people options? And because this has happened to me, where you're doing some research and then you're thinking to yourself, well, they haven't got what I want, or they haven't, I can't give them the feedback because I've already got these pre-selected ideas, so they clearly got an idea. And then you get into, I always remember, you probably never saw it over here, but there was a really good comedy program called Yes Minister. Have you ever seen it?
I've heard of it, yes.
Really great. I love it. It's about government, and how you can use, and this example that I'm thinking about, we'll try and put the link in the show notes actually, is how you can manipulate the questions to get the answers to what you want.
Right.
So
there's a name for that in political science. It's called push polling.
Oh,
where
right.
We're going to
okay.
deliberately ask you leading questions to get the response that we want.
Yes.
Either to persuade you, so it's kind of like a stealth advertising campaign, or to just get the numbers back out that we can then promote the way we want to. Sorry, though, I interrupted. Keep going.
No. I'm glad you said that, because that's exactly what it is. It was about in this comedy program, they're talking about introducing conscription, for young people. So it was the questions like, do you think the youngsters of today need some discipline and guidance? Do you think so you ask these 4 or 5 different questions that lead up to it, and then you say, do you think we should have conscription? And of course the answer is yes. Well, you asked me those 5 things, so how in the hell can I say no?
You just pinned yourself in a corner,
basically. Yeah, that's it. Yeah. Anyway, we'll try and put a link in the show notes for that.
So, nobody in marketing is doing this on purpose. Like, nobody's designing a push pull because you actually genuinely want people's responses. But we might be doing it accidentally, right? I mean, it's hard for us to be completely unbiased if we're involved in a project. And so we might ask kind of leading questions, even if we're not doing it on purpose, to kind of get to a place where whoever's answering the research survey, like you said, on the drop menus, like the order that you put the responses in the job, or the other options that are there that might make one look particularly good. All these things can bias our research results.
Yes, no, absolutely. And then it goes down, doesn't it, to sort of, so and what we were talking about was the sort of that hidden motivation.
Yeah.
So, the example of that for me is, I need to have a hole in my wall of a certain size so I can hang a picture. So what's the real reason that I want do I need a drill bit, or is the drill bit part of a larger thing, which actually is, I want to hang a picture of my grandchildren at the home at Sarasota so I don't miss them, or I feel connected to them. And that for me is where people don't get to in their research. They're dealing very much at that sort of transactional end rather than understanding that true motivations, aren't they?
Yeah, I remember when my grandparents told me that they no longer missed me because they had a picture of me on their wall until I was no longer necessary.
And they could turn it around, couldn't they?
That's true.
So you've just faced the wall.
You feel. Yeah. No, I mean, that's a great example, right? Because a drill is a drill is a drill. I mean, it's just, it's a thing that spins around and makes holes. How nuanced can it be? But the fact is that there are people for whom the drill is an avenue towards self-expression. My 15-year-old daughter is at an age where, like most 15-year-olds, like defining who she is and expressing that is very, very important to her. So her walls are just covered with forms of self-expression. And last night she asked me to hang 2 little miniature plant holders off of her wall, right? And I needed to use my drill for that. Now, I use my drill for lots of other things. I'm a hobbyist woodworker. And so that drill for me, I guess it's another form of self-expression, but it has an entirely different meaning to me. And somebody who was buying a drill just for the purposes that my daughter was wanting it for, which was kind of home decor, would have a different underlying set of motivations than I have as somebody who uses the same type of tool for a different usage, right? A different underlying motivation.
And that's where I think with this pickle and this problem is the big question is, do you understand customers' real underlying motivations behind this? And clearly, sometimes the customer doesn't even know themselves. And therefore they're being driven by things they're not aware of even themselves. So, how do you pick that out? That's the issue.
So the power tools is a really interesting category, right? Because
let me tell you, mate, it's not.
It really is.
No, it's really interesting to you, but
no. I've listened to your soccer stories. You're going to sit down and listen to my power tools.
Okay. Hold on. Let me just put this chair back a bit so I can start relaxing as you talk.
That chair was put together with power tools. I teach a case to my MBA students about DeWalt, which is a brand of power tools, which is owned by Black & Decker. And one of the fascinating aspects of this case was, so Black & Decker was making a set of tools for professional tradesmen, and they were not doing well. And it had nothing to do with performance. Like if you'd asked these tradesmen, like, what do you want in power tools? They would have given you a list of performance metrics, right? We want the battery to last a certain length. We want a certain amount of power and torque and reliability. And Black & Decker was meeting all of those benchmarks. The problem was Black & Decker also sold a line of consumer grade tools that looked very similar. Right. And so, to borrow a Colin phrase, these roughy-tufty construction workers were like picking up these Black & Decker tools that looked very much like the tools that like a casual homeowner would have in their closet. And so
it wasn't be associated with them.
Yeah, it wasn't meeting their underlying need of needing to feel like a professional.
Sure.
And so what they did is they scrapped the brand. They sold almost exactly the same tools, but under the DeWalt brand now. And it was this bright yellow color, and they kind of beefed up some of the design so that it looked kind of more tough and rugged. And I had a student point out that who'd worked in construction, and he's like, those bright yellow tools, they look fantastic. You can take them out of the box. They also get scratched up and dirty almost immediately, which is a plus for this category, because that shows that you use your tool. It was a brilliant bit of branding that would have never come out of research, because if you asked these guys, they would have told you all we care about is torque, right? That's the only thing that matters.
Yeah, no, that's a really good example. The irony now of that is, though, isn't it, that you can buy the DeWalt brand as a consumer. Yeah, and they have this persona of being more professional and something like that.
So I think we've stumbled into another podcast topic entirely, which I would love for us to get into at some point. But which is the kind of the relationship between brand and then the audience that buys the brand. And you'll see these fluctuations all the time. I think you're right that DeWalt is not seen as the same grade of professional tool that it was 20 years ago when they launched, for exactly the reason that Makita too. And that's created space for other of these tool brands, like Festool is one. And there's we just finally stumbled into a topic I was interested in, Colin. We're done talking about Apple. We're now going to talk about power tools.
I noticed how, I was just sitting there thinking to myself, he's talking a lot. This is clearly an area that he's enjoying.
I make no apologies. Yeah, no, it's created a space for newer brands in the last 20 years who can move into that more professional niche. And I would expect that over time, the same thing will happen again. And these super elite brands will kind of become a little bit more pedestrian. That'll create space at the top. I think that happens in a lot of industries. So, if anyone wants to hear about that, write in a pickle, and then we can.
Yeah, I can see you're going to send in a pickle yourself now, aren't you?
We've got a question here from Brian about
Brian Hamilton from Emory University. Yeah.
From Emory University. Well, that sounds like a fascinating pickle, Colin. I'm glad you chose that one.
So let's get off of talking power tools. Otherwise, we'll be talking power tools for the rest of the show. Because when you start looking at, and we were chatting, weren't we, about say like a watch?
Yeah.
Yeah. And this, I know you're going to talk about in a moment, this sort of jobs to be done bit.
Yeah.
Which is, what's the function of a watch? Well, it's to tell you the time. So I either buy a watch that costs me $10, that will tell me the time.
Yep.
Or I buy a watch that's $2,000-3,000. Yeah, maybe not. And they both do the same job, but with one, with the higher end, there's a whole different motivation about of why somebody would buy that, which is obviously to do with status and all those other things.
What's really fun is when you get examples where those two sets of motivations come into conflict. Like there may be some brands of really expensive watch that actually don't tell time very well, that don't keep, but they're very high status. That happened in car brands for a while. So in the 1980s, DeLorean was a very high status car.
Yeah.
It was the car in the Back to the Future movies.
Yeah.
Also notoriously not a good car. So if the purpose of a car is to get you from one place to another, transportation, DeLoreans apparently would break down all the time. Jaguar was another example. There was a period of time.
Just before you moved on to the Jaguar, the great thing about the DeLorean was that you could go back in time.
That's true.
You could fix the fault before you. It was an optional extra.
You were never late, even if your car did break down. You could just start up the flux capacitor and.
Sorry, you were saying about Jaguar.
Jaguar. There was a period of time, in the 1980s where Jaguar was an extremely high status car, and from what I understand, also not very reliable. So it would break down a lot. And so, you sometimes people are willing to get kind of this status motivation, even in cases where that means it's not doing its primary functional job very well.
Sure. Yeah. And another example is back in the day when I was in corporate life, we launched this product called Tonto. Okay. And this product, so I was in telecoms, and it was a telephone system or telephone, but it had a QWERTY keyboard, and it had micro drives. I don't know if anybody ever remembered micro drives, and a screen. And the interesting bit is, this was a major product launch.
So it sounds like it's kind of a desktop smartphone almost.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's like probably about the size of a laptop now. Yeah. But obviously back in those days, you didn't have laptops really. Desktops were all around. But it was, Anyway, what's the key learning? The key learning here was they did a hell of a lot of research. It said that they should sell X amount of units. They invested millions in producing this bloody thing, and it didn't work. It didn't work. It didn't sell.
Yeah.
And within a year, it was dropped. And so that's part of. I've got all this research, but actually the product's not there. And for me, it was addressing a perceived need that the customer didn't have.
Yeah.
Yeah. The research told them that it had all this wonderful needs and everything else, but actually it wasn't. It was probably the engineers who thought, oh, well, if we had a hokey cokey 4000 to this and we had this and we had that, who wouldn't want to buy this product?
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a lot of innovation that happens that way, where it's kind of at the level of the engineering. And like, look at this new bell that we can add here, or this new whistle that we can add there. And some of that may even line up with some of what customers are saying in research. But unless it gets down to this kind of fundamental underlying motivation, like, is it solving a problem for the customer in a way that they can understand? Then
so do you want to talk about this jobs to be done bit? Because I know that you refer to it on your courses.
Yeah, so I teach this as part of the my introductory marketing class. So this is jobs to be done is a framework that was developed by Clayton Christensen at Harvard Business School. They've published several articles and I think a couple of books on it. On the one hand, so I'm going to give you like kind of the pros and cons of it. It's mostly pro. I like the framework. From my perspective, most of the jobs to be done framework is not actually anything new. It's not like a new idea. To me, it's just positioning. So in marketing strategy, there's segmentation and targeting and positioning. That's kind of your marketing strategy. Jobs to be done is just positioning. Where I think that it's effective, though, where I think it's kind of brilliant, is that it's explaining the simple idea of positioning, which is you need to create a product that meets the needs of some group of people. It's explaining that idea in a new and different way that I think can help some people understand it better. So that's why I teach it, and that's why I'm. If people end up resonating with this and it makes sense to them, then I encourage them to use it and run with it. So jobs to be done. The basic idea of the jobs to be done framework is essentially think about any purchase a customer makes as that customer hiring that product or service to do a job for them, right? So when we talked about the drill hanging, putting a hole in the wall to hang a picture, like the job that the customer wants to be done is to express themselves through home decor or to feel closer to family. That's the job. And so I'm hiring this tool to do that job for me. Right? And I think that the real power and insight of this framework is when we take it to the next step and ask, like, would the customer then fire that product or service? Or would they rehire? Like, would they go back and choose to hire that product or service again to do a similar job? And if not, well, that's where problem is. We're failing to do the job that the customer wanted us to do, that they hired us to do.
And therefore, why is the hiring bit important? Is there
It's just a different way of thinking about the same problem, right? So it's a way of thinking about purchases from the perspective of meeting needs, as opposed to if you were to hire an employee for Beyond Philosophy, you wouldn't just do it because you wanted to spend money, right?
Sure.
You would hire that employee because you had a specific job within your organization that needed to be done. So that's, like I said, it's not fundamentally a new idea. It is a different way of thinking about it, though, that I think for at least some people resonates and makes more sense.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I've liked the framework. I think part of it is just pushing yourself sort of intellectually to think about what is the customer actually doing here, and that leads to understanding the true motivations behind what the customer's doing.
Can I give you the example that I use in class? So
please.
To kind of bring this home for especially for my students who are younger than me, I should have a slide where I show the logos of a dozen different social media platforms. All right, so Facebook and Twitter and YouTube and TikTok and all. Fundamentally, from like a strategy perspective, they all kind of do the same thing, right? It's all ways for individual people to share information with other people or groups of people, right? We can, text or video or pictures. A lot of them do multiples of these, but that's fundamentally what all social media platforms do. So from that perspective, they should all be the same. Like they shouldn't do. But when I show them all those logos and I say, do you use all of these platforms to do the same job for you? Like these platforms do different things for you. And then they say, oh, right. Yeah. Like I wouldn't use Twitter for this. I would use Instagram for that. Or I wouldn't use TikTok to meet this need. I would use YouTube to meet that need. And I think that makes it a little bit more concrete for them. So we're hiring these different social media platforms to do different jobs for us.
Sure. Yeah, no, good. So let's go back to the pickle, and let's go back to maybe just sort of summarize our thoughts here. So the pickle is they've done research and they're not getting the sales that they expect. So, what can they do? The key issue for me is the first issue, which is, well, what research have you done? And what type of research? Because, again, and we could wax lyrical about this, couldn't we? There are very different forms of research that you could do. But the key issue for me is, are you getting at the underlying motivation of the real reason that the customer wants the product? Yeah. Or do you have some preconceived ideas what that is, and your biases as an organization have biased the survey or whatever it may be? And typically, I find in cases like this, it is that underlying reason that's missing, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, if we could spin that to I think 3 different quick pieces of advice. Yeah. One is to use multiple research methods when possible. Yeah. Right. So surveys are great. You can get some real good quantitative data out of surveys, but they've got blind spots. Can you also do some observational techniques? Can you also do some other things? The second one is for a lot of decisions that we want to make, getting the research as close to the actual behavior as possible is going to be really helpful. So again, we talked about how people are in a different frame of mind when they're in the kind of answering a hypothetical research survey than when they're actually in the theme park ordering lunch. And then the third one is, can you get some people who are not directly involved in the project involved in the research, whether that's an independent group within your organization, whether that's hiring an outside group of consultants or research research people to do that for you. But it's really hard for us to step out of our own perspective, and that can sometimes bias the way that we design our research. Getting some third parties involved.
Yeah, and I particularly like your thought around, and we're talking about ethnography, aren't we? Which is, effectively watching what customers do at the point that they're doing it, and then being able to pick up those little things, even the micro expressions, and being able to dive down into that, I think is really, really powerful.
Yeah, I had a friend who did that kind of research and was doing an ethnography on parents buying jars of baby food. So he was just sitting in the grocery aisle watching people look at baby food. And he said it was really common for these parents to pick up these jars of baby food and then like squeeze the jar as if it was fruit. And then sometimes even put it up to their nose to smell. These things that we would do as we were selecting fruit or vegetables. And if you ask them, nobody would be aware that they were doing this. People were not doing this. It was this automatic, intuitive response. But he took from that kind of the importance of, communicating the freshness of the foods. And so they recommended they change the packaging and, have more pictures of fresh fruits and vegetables and all that kind of stuff. And these were insights that you would never get out of a survey necessarily.
No, absolutely. And I think, just reinforcing what you're saying, it should be a mixture of things.
Yes.
And that's the key. So good. So we hope that's helped, and we hope that your sales improve. And we don't hope it's like one of these wonderful Tonto machines where you're then just going to chunk it. There's probably there's probably some warehouse with a load of Tontos full of micro drives that if anybody wants to buy, then they'll be going very cheap, I'm sure. So thanks very much, everybody, and we look forward to talking to you next week.
When we will talk exclusively about power tools. So look forward to that next week.
Great. Thanks so much for watching. And if you enjoyed this video, please make sure you subscribe so you don't miss an episode.